Thank you so much for attending our panel, Decarbonization in Emerging Markets. I'm Olga ZANELLI, Energy and, Henrik, hello. Energy and Infrastructure Partner of the international law firm Herbert Freehills. And I'm happy to introduce my guests today. Marie-Laure MAZAUD, Chief Executive Officer of STOA. Bertrand de la BORDE, Director, Global Head Infrastructure of IFC, and you know already, Henrik RABER, Standard Chartered Bank. And our session, I hope, will be very interactive. So if ever you have any questions during the session, please interrupt me, interrupt our guests, because we really would like you to ask any question you want to ask, and that we share with you our views on emerging markets, and obviously that we have a feedback from you, because I'm sure many of you have a wonderful, very interesting experience in emerging markets. I'm personally working for more than 15 years at Herbert Freehills, exclusively in emerging markets and exclusively in energy and infrastructure projects. So obviously the type of the projects are changing and developing, and every year all of us will earn something new, and we will talk about this today. But what are the key strategies of decarbonization? So obviously I will say something banal, but I think it's good to repeat it. So what kind of projects all of us we are facing every day? First is energy efficiency. Obviously, we are talking about renewables, we are talking about different developing resilient infrastructure. That's quite clear. Also transport, what we are facing in transport, any type of projects with the reducing of emission of CO2, and obviously a lot of these mobility transport projects, which are quite new as well during the last years. And of course, construction and industry sectors with the integrating of new green technology, cleaner technologies. But my question, and so maybe the first question I will ask to Bertrand, what other subsectors you can see which will achieve this, this decarbonization aim? Or do you agree that these sectors which I mentioned are the most common and this is much enough for us?
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Look, that's a very broad question, so I'll try to narrow it down and perhaps be a bit provocative. We are after lunch to wake us up. There is a lot that we are collectively doing in solar, wind, and we want to continue and doubling down, no doubt. But I'd like to briefly touch on two challenges that we are all aware of in this room, and nevertheless, which are still massively overlooked. First one is phasing out coal in Asia. Why? If we focus for now in greenhouse gas emission coming from the power sector, it's around 30% of the total, and then you have transport, agriculture, and so on. But let's focus on this 30%. More than 70% of that comes from coal-fired power. Coal-fired power is around 35% of what's generated, but it's by far the most polluting, hence 70% of emission. 2/3 of that comes from Asia. China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Pakistan, and so on. But now, when you look at the future, it's even more scary in the sense that the average age of coal-fired power plant here in Europe, in the US, in South Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Russia, is 30 to 40 years. So it's an issue which is largely self-liquidated. We are close to being done. While in Asia, the average life of this coal-fired power plant is 11 years. And some more is being built. So if you look forward, 95% of this emission from coal-fired power plant I was talking about will come from Asia, 95%. So that issue is really a huge one, and because it's such a tricky one to address, it's largely being overlooked. So what to do about that? Three things. One, I go back to what I was mentioning, doubling down on building more wind and solar for sure, so that we stop building new coal and we have renewable. No doubt, we all do that. But two, do much more in terms of transmission and distribution reinforcement, not only because it does allow to integrate more renewable energy, But also when you have, for instance, in India, 1.4 billion people, 20% losses in your network, the first way to reduce emission is just to cut these losses from 20 to 10%. We collectively, including us, development institutions, have to do much more on that. And the third one, and that's the big nut to crack, or the huge issue, will be at some point to close earlier some of these plants, which will be 15, 20 years, and that will require a lot of political courage, a lot of subsidies, and likely carbon pricing. So just to leave this one thought with us. The second one, briefly, very different. It's about methane. We all know that about CO2, which is by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emission, but methane has contributed for around 1/3 of global warming. And they do act in a very different way. Methane has a much stronger impact, but much shorter. Average lifespan is around 15 years, while for CO2, it can last for several centuries. But as a result, if you just look at the next 20 years, 1 ton of methane has an impact which is 80 times worse than 1 ton of CO2. So, as long as we were considering climate change as an issue for our grandchildren, the logical thing to do was to only focus on CO2, because methane within 20 years will have taken care of itself. But now that we do realize that climate change is also an issue for our children, and in fact even for ourselves, we'd better also, obviously, continue working on CO2, but working on methane. And the good news is that if we cut methane emission now, within 10 years, it will have positive impact. Among others, let's wait much more on the waste sector. It's a fairly low-hanging fruit, where currently, again, much more could be done, be it in terms of recycling, waste to energy, and so on. So I would really come up with these 2 subsectors.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. Henrik, maybe the question to you: how do you support your clients, and maybe also you have some innovative approaches to the decarbonization?
Thank you. So we're very committed to sustainable. We have an ambition of doing about 300 billion of sustainable finance by 2030. And actually from a revenue basis by achieving over $1 billion out of sustainable finance annually by 2030, and we're well on that target. Many institutions have these targets, and I think collectively as an industry, we're working as a group to head in the right direction. Obviously, more needs to be done. In terms of supporting our clients, I think there's many ways that we work with our clients. So in emerging markets, and specifically, power and water are 2 critical pieces. We are dealing with emerging market countries that are some distance behind in their infrastructure from developed markets. So the issues that they face are somewhat different, and we're trying to navigate that and do that in a sustainable way. One of the areas we're very focused on is transition finance. So we have a team within the bank that works with a client in terms of transitioning their portfolio or transitioning their business. For businesses or for countries, it's very difficult to move at pace through the transition process. So giving them advice and guidance on that is as critical as pushing the sustainable agenda, because they need assistance to get there. For example, that can be work around their sustainable framework, or helping them doing sustainable bonds or issuing loans, or just also connecting clients to each other to make sure that they're using the latest technology possible. So we work with all of our clients around the sustainable agenda. In emerging markets, there are obviously different challenges, and each country and or continent has different challenges. What is going on in ASEAN or Thailand, Malaysia, for example, is very different from the needs of West Coast of Africa. In addition to sustainable finance, we're obviously very focused around health, which is another component, so hospitals or education, and the social element around sustainable finance. So across all of our client dialogues, we're committed, focused, and we're on a journey. I think, as I mentioned on previous panel, the interest rate and dollar movements have actually had some negative effects for emerging markets, and particularly COVID hit the African countries very hard, who already had debt burdens, and now that became a further challenge. So we hopefully, in a lower interest rate environment, will be able to pick up the pace on this. But I think if you look in India, you know, the substantial progress made, for example, in solar, where they're very low-cost producer there. It's been very impressive. If you look in what's happening in some of the Middle Eastern countries, the way they're pushing non-fossil in terms of solar or wind, and actually some of their countries are strategically placed for that, given their position, whether it be wind or sun. So I think there's a lot of good progress happening. But yes, there's obviously concerns because there's a lot to be done. Asian Development Bank, I think, forecasts about 1.3 trillion is needed in the future. I think the biggest thing we can do in the financial community is to provide the capital to enable the shift to renewables or sustainable, and that's our main focus.
Thank you so much. And to Marie-Laure, I will have more generic question. What's your general approach to climate adaptation?
I think STOA approach to climate adaptation is based on two pillars. One is the engagement with our portfolio community to identify climate change, physical risk and vulnerabilities. And the second pillar is adaptation finance tracking for transparency and reporting purposes, which is becoming more and more important. On the first pillar, it means that on a pre-investment phase, we do a screening to identify physical risk based on asset location. So we do have mapping, and we do use, advanced technology to identify where the project is located and how it's vulnerable to physical risk. And when we also include in our assessment, assessment on the maturity level of the company that we are targeting in relation to identification and management of climate change risk. And if needed, we conduct a more in-depth analysis and establish also a climate change action plan to be developed and monitored. We do also have peer-to-peer events. We organized 2 weeks ago in Paris with our participation a 2-day event on which climate change were at the top level. On the second pillar, I think we follow the common principle for adaptation finance, the same methodology that is used by multilateral development bank or IDFC. And we have an internal tool, that allowed us to assess for every project where we think there could be a climate change, component. Overall, I think our target is to finance at least 65% of projects with a co-benefit climate. So we do have finance a lot of projects in the renewable energy sector, but the next challenge is also to add to this target, climate adaptation, especially for infrastructure projects. We are all aware that these adaptation actions are at cost, but nevertheless, the cost of inaction is definitely much higher. So as an example, we do in our portfolio have implemented green plan for 2 companies, and it means, looking after energy efficiency for the buildings, looking after energy, management system to get ISO certification, and use also renewable energy, which is the most colloquial. But this is not only as a benefit in terms of the environment, avoiding CO2 emission, but also allowed, energy bill cost reduction and saving.
Okay, thank you so much. Now maybe we should talk about what type of emerging markets we are thinking of when we think about decarbonization, because we know that in some of the emerging markets, decarbonization is going faster. In some of them, it takes longer and with a lot of challenges. So maybe we can start with Africa. And Bertrand, Henrik, I understand that you have experience in the country, so maybe you can share with us what kind of challenges and so the good lessons you learned there.
Thanks. And that's definitely a question close to my heart. For many years at IFC, so private sector arm of the World Bank, I was in charge of our Africa infrastructure team. I lived in Ghana, I lived in Senegal, and I'm quite passionate about it. And here again, at the risk of being provocative, let me stress a few things. Sub-Saharan Africa, so excluding North Africa and South Africa, it's 1.1 billion people. If you look at the power sector, these 1.1 billion people are responsible for 0.5% of all emissions produced by power sector. 0.5%. In terms of greenhouse gas emission, Africa is not emitting as much as other continents, but most of it comes more from changing land use, deforestation, agriculture. And by the way, the best way to fight deforestation is to have clean cooking and electricity. So let's do not bark at the wrong trees, as they say in English. Again, when it comes to power, 0.5% comes from Africa. So what does that mean? Wind and solar, and again, we are doing a lot of it, is great, especially because a number of African countries have a lot of potential and you can produce it at fairly low cost. So we have a number of wind and solar projects from Mozambique, Senegal, South Africa, and others. That's great. But you have 600 million people in Africa out of 1.1 billion who still do not have access to power. Hence this big initiative we are launching at the World Bank, this M300, you may have heard about it, to connect half of these people over the next decade. And you need power to supply that. And you will need some base power. Here you see me coming. So you will need some hydro and you will need some gas in selected countries. Hydro, and the three of us are in this fantastic project Nartigal in Cameroon, which is being commissioned as we speak, 1.2 billion euro, 400 megawatt. We need collectively to be able to continue to do this project. Obviously, we need to put the bar very high on environmental and social aspects, but we need to have the courage to do it, and we need to have our shareholders, and I'm also talking to our French shareholder here, to support us on this project. We are also now, and IFC, working and have structured the financing on an hydro project with Meridiam. Thierry was there in Gabon, working with EDF in Malawi, Madagascar. That's very much needed. And gas, gas has a role to play in selected countries as a transition to bring this flexible base load. We have financed, for instance, a large gas-fired power plant in Mozambique, where we have done also a lot on the renewable side, wind and solar. So, on your question on Africa, I think really climate change, greenhouse gas emission is an issue, particularly deforestation, agriculture. When it comes to power, let's double down on renewable energy, but also let's make sure that these 500 million people who do not have access get reliable, cheap energy. Thanks.
Thank you. What's your experience, Henrik?
I would very much echo the points made. I saw an interesting statistic recently. So one hyperscaled data center requires 1 gigawatt. In the US, they're forecasting they need 18 by 2030. All of New York City consumes 6. So when we talk about the scale of the energy problem and we compare the fact that many in Africa don't have sufficient capacity or access to energy, and then we look what's happening in the developed markets, there's quite a contrast. And the need for global power is about to go up significantly on the back of digital and data. So that means that capital is now increasingly competing. Where do we go? Do we fund hyperscale data centers, or do we fund African projects? And I think this is an interesting period that we need to balance. We've had great relationship with IFC and the World Bank, who's done fantastic work, particularly around Africa, supporting projects. Because the other challenge that many institutions have, in particular banks, are credit ratings and other RWAs or challenges around financing. So we need a partner to come in and assist around a project to make it increasingly efficient and capital efficient and bankable. So working with the IFC or others is absolutely critical, and we need more of that availability. Or there's going to need to be a different approach to how RWA and banks run some of their capital models, because otherwise the capital to support Africa around power or water or infrastructure, roads, etc., won't be forthcoming to the scale that's needed or forecast.
Thank you, Henrik. And Marie-Laure, as far as I know, STOA secured a very big, even the biggest, right, PPP project in Brazil in transportation. So maybe you can share your experience.
Yeah, I think I wanted to touch base on decarbonization about urban transportation, which is, I think, becoming a huge challenge with increasing urbanization in emerging markets. And I think pursuing this strategy is also without facing, huge challenges, as the business model per se of urban transportation project, as you know, rely necessarily on public counterparties, technical expertise first, to conduct this huge project with intermobility, a lot of civil work, geological risk, as well as public funding through construction subsidy and capacity payment to make them, palatable and bankable. And as a result of that, there are only few public entities which are in the region that we are targeting that are able to support this combination of being credit-worthy and having the funding capacity, as well as the technical know-how to support this project. And clearly, São Paulo Metro Line 6 was, as a very large PPP, is illustrate, this huge combination. It's a 15 kilometers underground metro line that is structured under the 24 years PPP contract with São Paulo State, which is the third largest economy of Latin America, just the state of São Paulo, which, make certainly a big difference. And the PPP encompasses not only civil works, but also rolling stock and signaling, and it's a 3 billion total project cost. And in this partnership, we have been able to help and frame the project, contractually, and also to make it fit for finance on a limited recourse basis. That was the first time that BNDES, as the national public bank, allowed to take a construction risk on a limited recourse basis with the backing partially of commercial bank for 47% of the risk, and the remaining taken by BNDES. So we closed the commercial contract and our entry in December 2020, while the financing only take place, 18 or 19 months later in August 2022, and we were, bridging with Acciona support the construction risk. But it means that it can be realized, but it is realized, in circumstances where, the partnership with the state is proven to be excellent. We have, regular contact, we have, good governance, and despite we encounter some challenges linked to a geological challenge, also some warning around station and environmental study that need to be further deepened. I think the state has always complied with its obligation, which is an essential condition to the project success, and the project ultimately will be completed in 2 phases and reaching COD in October 2026, and for the first part, and full COD by October 2027. So it is possible, but it requires a number of features to be aligned. There is obviously 50% subsidy provided by the state of São Paulo on top. So half of the funding is provided by the state of São Paulo, and there is a dialogue which is a daily dialogue between the state of São Paulo, their technical expert, and the concessionaire.
Thank you so much, Melo. Maybe we touched Africa, we touched Latin America, but maybe let me tell you some words about Central Asia. So this is the region where I could say I'm originally came from. And this is the agenda of today, because as you know, so today the president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Tokayev, is in Paris in order to meet the president and to talk Macron and to talk about decarbonization in Kazakhstan. And I also would like to attract the attention of the audience of the importance of these new emerging markets, for instance, for France, because of very, very good political relationship in between Kazakhstan and France, Uzbekistan and France, and other countries. There is a huge, huge development and investments of different infrastructure project aimed to decarbonize the economy of these Central Asia countries. In these countries, the aim is to come to the carbon neutrality by 2060. And there is a huge need of investment, around $600 billion. The legal framework, and I can tell it as a lawyer and is the one who is dealing with a lot of projects in the region for the companies like Total, Voltalia, and so other companies for the biggest projects in this region. So the legal framework is quite friendly, and these markets are not so known yet in Europe, and so that's why I would be very, very happy if any of you have any questions with regard to the specificities of this market. I would be happy to answer on any of your questions, because this is something new which may give very, very interesting opportunities for all of us. And before we are coming to the last section of our panel, do you have any questions to our speakers with regard to their experience in different emerging market regions? And so maybe you can share your experience in some of the regions in the decarbonization projects. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, panel, for a wonderful explanation of the emerging market. I work for a Japanese bank. My name is Sujoy. The question I have is, obviously, the emerging market, when we think about emerging market, it's almost considered as a single B corporate name, and we think in that front. The first thing that we think about is the default risk, and the project's kind of bankability. In your leadership role, can you explain for the international investors, how you are thinking, or how you are thinking of in extracting international liquidity in your specific region? Because where we see is the same kind of liquidity that was available in last 5 years has remained almost steady. A limited number of international banks, unless and until there's a direct client relationship, they come to the financing. How you are thinking from your side in bringing in the liquidity from the international market? Thank you.
Bertrand, you can start.
So your point is really relevant, in particular, but not only, if we focus on Africa. To some extent in Asia and Latin America, the liquidity is still there, but much less in Africa. So the combination of, should I say, all recipes, it remains very challenging, and trying additional or new things. Old recipe in infrastructure, quite often, most of the time, working with governments on sectorial policies, governance, creditworthiness of public entities who are off-takers is a must-have. We were all hoping that, for instance, when it comes to off-grid distributed generation, we could do without that, and realize that even in this sector, you need this. So it remains something that we have to work on. Now, on top of that, it's trying to work in a systemic way on a given project. I'll come back to that, but beyond one project, on a framework which can give investors visibility and scale. So that's what we are trying to do on this M300 initiative to bring access to Africa, with 15 countries where we have both the government sector part, we also have the scale, we have a replicable framework, trying to do that with, and now I'm coming to specific tools, also doing even more in terms of specific guarantees. So the World Bank Group has MIGA, which is dedicated to that, but has also some other products, and we are trying to expand the toolbox. For instance, to have a specific guarantee of the off-taker of the payment risk, which quite often, in particular in the energy sector, ends up being the main risk. Blended or concessional finance. A number of these projects do make sense, but still it's very hard to be self-standing from a financing standpoint. So how to bring more blended finance, but also perhaps as compared to the past, do it at times in a way where we leverage more on each and every dollar of blended finance, including first loss guarantee. In terms of local currency also, we now also have scheme which allows us in countries where nobody has access to long-term local currency to use a bit of blended finance to lend in local currency. So on your point that the type of things we can, that's as international development institution, we are trying to do more to counter this growing challenge.
So I think that's an excellent question and something that we wrestle with every day. Many of our countries are sub-investment grade rated. So to begin with, the project itself may be capped by the country ceiling, which creates issues right from the start. And naturally, even the project may be higher rated on a standalone basis or credit enhanced, but that has a challenge. Then secondly is obviously investors want a return on their capital and a return relative to the risk that they're taking. And I think that was the point I was saying earlier with the explosion of needs from infrastructure around the globe, from developed and emerging markets. It's going to be interesting to see how the capital flows. The STANs is a really interesting space which has seen a lot of capital through ECA and other opportunities. And that's now suddenly now competing with Africa, Middle East or Asia. So this is a really, really interesting question. The way we've done it is, as Bertrand highlighted, through risk sharing, through credit participation, through taking first loss, credit insurance. Those are the main mechanisms. Or because trying to find new capital in a competing world has been a little bit of a challenge. Whilst global investment in infrastructure has gone up considerably, as a percentage, you're right, the notional amount in certain markets is relatively unchanged.
I think just to add, I think we see also some debt funding that is emerging, and that's also provide additional, debt financing and financing to medium size of platform, renewable energy platform in which we invest in. I think what will struggle us in the future as investor is as we build out platform and project is also to find out, secondary market to sell our participation and recycle the financing that we've provided to get, newcomers emerging and new project on ground and being de-risked. That's I think for us as an investor a true challenge in the market. There is not a lot of capacity in the market to recycle for the time being.
Yes, my question is targeted more specifically at Henrik RABER. Since the beginning of the year, we've seen the gradual opening of the Global Emerging Markets database with the disclosure of loss default rates for the kind of loans that are undertaken by development banks and DFIs. Has it had any impact on your outlook on how you see risk in emerging markets? Have it affected significantly, and in which direction your policy regarding your own exposure to emerging markets?
It's not impacted our own exposure. We're very focused on our markets. We see them as growth opportunities. We actually think that the forward for emerging markets is going to be very positive, particularly in a rate normalization market, and also with a slightly weaker dollar. That's going to be very positive for EM. So we're very pro. We're still very active. We're increasing our balance sheets and exposure, and we think there's a lot of opportunity out there. And if anything, I think we're seeing more investors come back to emerging markets after a quieter period. And in particular, we're seeing a lot more interest in local currency. So local currency, Bertrand touched upon earlier, has been a bit of a quiet period the last 5 years, but is now starting to come back. And that is very important, because to really grow at the root level, you actually need local currency finance, particularly in some of these infrastructure markets. Otherwise, you're dealing with cross currencies, hedging, all kinds of other complexities. So you need the ability to provide the local currency. So whilst we've had LGDs go up and down, I think they're going to be normalized, and we think we're going to have a strong period of opportunity. And if anything, if you look what has happened the last couple of years, many of the countries are now exiting some of the restructuring plans that have been underway through a relatively good process with the World Bank and many others in order to get the country stabilized post-COVID and actually back to growth momentum.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Amin. I would like to ask this question because you mentioned blended finance earlier and also climate change. I would like to know, like in terms of strategy for investment, do you prioritize mitigation or adaptive finance, or how do you combine both?
I think we're trying to combine both, and also to give on top of adaptation also more focus to social impact and biodiversity too. The difficulty on adaptation is that you need a lot of usually subsidies to provide, the feature to compensate and to offset, climate change risk. And that's not, so obvious, and it is not always, designed and conceived by public project and public authorities to feature these aspects, because it has a cost to it. So it means that when you design and you conceptualize, project to climate change and adaptation, you basically need to also embark, donors, subsidies, and a long-term view on the project, which is well above the numbers of a given concession from a public services to a private company. So it means that the impact that the private sector per se can have on adaptation is limited. But at least I think we need to advocate it and educate also our participation to consider it moving forward and provide step by step, in investment, regular investment through maintenance program and renewal programs to adapt their assets to this disturbancy and vulnerabilities.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have only 2 minutes left, and it was a very big, interesting topic we wanted also to share with you as to how to accelerate the private capital in decarbonization field. So maybe just in two words, each of the speaker can say, share some thoughts about this.
I don't know about 2 words, but I think in addition to financial capital, we also need human capital. So to solve the scale, we're going to need a lot of talented individuals who come into this sector and come up with solutions. And I think the scale of the issue and actually the attractiveness of the financing is attracting more human capital into this market.
I think I cannot share the same. I think we are fighting, every days, I think, to retain people in our project, and to have the right people and the right skill. And I think we do try to also create a community in different sectors, and from CFOs to head of HG&E or to CEOs, etc., so that they can share also their views, on forums, and also create connection and be less alone. Despite I must say we are trying to remain very sparring partners with the management, the management of our companies in our portfolio, because obviously every day is a long river.
Bertrand?
I would really echoing the importance of this human aspect, absolutely, be it on the private, but also, if not even more, on the public side, absolutely. Going also with good or decent governance, that's really key. Nearly of secondary importance, but still important, and it goes back also to your question, is finding, and some of us in the room have dedicated a good part of their career to that, but finding better ways for the private and the public to work together in terms of what they do, and also in terms of how we mix financing sources. To go back, for instance, the water sector, which is coming back as a priority, and where the mitigation and the adaptation parts are really goes hand in hand. It's typically a sector where the private sector has a role to play. We have to keep in mind lessons from the past and what did not work at times with the private sector, but the private sector has a key role to play in terms of catalyzing investments, in terms of bringing more capacity on construction, operation, innovation, including on something like reducing water losses. Private sector can do much more. Now it remains a sector where quite often you will need, even with a great PPP, you will need some fairly significant level of subsidies. How you find these subsidies and how you optimize them is really a key question for the coming years.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, it was not possible to cover all the topics we wanted, but what is very important to say that maybe what's the biggest difference in decarbonization activities in emerging market as compared to developed market, that there is not a one defined solution. So each time for each specific project, we should find the tailored and very specific solutions. And so that's why the experience of our speakers is very, very valuable, because they know exactly how to solve the challenges, how to achieve the good result and the success in this very, very complicated markets. Thank you.
I'm not sure we know that much, but we are trying a lot.
Yes. So thank you so much, and have a very good rest of the afternoon.